Yeah. Okay. No, Outlook, you don't need to open right now. Okay. How's everyone doing on this ish morning?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Starting off with a yawn. Good start. You know, as I very much appreciate that Aya joined our class. That forces me to actually change up the jokes I make because she's heard all of them before. So I actually have to force myself to change up what I say sometimes. Okay, so you two, I know that you just said that you have finished Forage. Did you have a chance to read Forage a little bit?
Like the PDF?
No, so that the PDF was for the mushroom at the end of the world, right? So that's the more theoretical thing. The literary text is Forage. Yeah. Okay. How about you, Marcia? Did you have a chance to get through?
I'm moving, and
Yeah. Okay. Good.
like crazy.
I read the mushroom at the end of the world.
But about the mushroom, I actually read that.
Nice. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna work with this, and I get it. It's midterms. It's fine. So we'll think on the spot here as to what we'll do. I assume that for the poetry, at least, which is going to be obviously the core of the class, what we'll do is very similar to what we did when we did Blake and Shelley. Right, we'll read some of them out loud, and it'll allow us to at least all be on the same page vis-a-vis some of the poems that we're going to be discussing. Right, just so everyone can be again together on this. Okay, so speaking of mushroom at the end of the world, how I was planning on talking today was just a few introductory remarks, because I don't think we have presentations today. Yeah, you're doing 2 weeks. Yeah. Good, I remembered that properly. So do a few introductory remarks that'll lead us into a bit on Anna Singh and her work here, which I only gave you 30 pages of. Not expecting you to read the entire necessarily 30 pages, but I think it does give you a good sense of what the entirety of the book is, and if you want to flip through it or anything like that, as usual in class, feel free to pass it around and look through diatribes on mushrooms, which I think is cool, but maybe that's just me. And then most of the class, we're just going to go through Forage. So you might think, well, this is going to be a more normal class, right? A more laid back class where we talk about poems and why, according to Rita Wong, capitalism sucks and is antithetical to food cultivation, right? But of course, it wouldn't be a planetary imagination course if we didn't start off with something a bit bizarre, right? But not in the cosmic mysticism sense that we've kind of been talking about here and there. Something completely different. So I wanted to start off with this, and I think it's going to get us into some of our main topics for today. So I'm going to play a clip, not show you what it is and not tell you what it is, and I just want you to think of what it might be. Okay, it does relate to the topic of today's class. Okay, so my volume's at 100. Let's see if it actually. The sound hasn't started yet, so don't worry. we'll stop it here for now. Initial thoughts. What do you think this is?
So, do you remember when the internet was coming up?
Very, very vaguely. I was right on the cusp of when the internet just
Yeah,
started.
because we were supposed to get connected through a telephone line,
Yeah.
landing line, and the sound when was connecting was kind of like that.
Yeah, that's right. This grating sound that you're not quite sure what's happening.
Yeah,
You feel like you're being sucked into a portal or something like that.
That's right.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
right.
Good. Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind?
Like it sounded like ambient, like dystopia. Like it sounds like Bjork. I don't know if you know.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, Bjork. Oh, that's a good comparison. I like that. What do you think made that noise? So, obviously, there is a computer somewhere here, but what's the basis of the noise, do we think? Is it just a guy doing random things in the background?
I don't know well my instruments.
It's all about instruments. Maybe there are some sounds from nature.
Sounds from nature. How do you get that from nature? What in nature makes that noise?
I don't know, some blend of technology, and the guy goes there to the nature and captures the sound, records the sound.
That's oddly specific and kind of true, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Except he brought nature to the technology rather than bringing technology out to the nature. So this is what I've been looking at for the past minute and a half. Mushrooms.
You're scared.
Oh no. What is that?
I thought it was a banana.
No, it's not a banana. Why is this not going away? There we go. Here, I'll put it in full screen like that. There's no... So this is what I've been looking at.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So they're blue oyster mushrooms.
So psychedelic.
Yes. I think it's added to the lights, right? That are the but basically what this guy did, I say guy, I have no idea. Right? What this person did is plug in some blue oyster mushrooms into the kind of electronic box that you see in the background there. And what you've been hearing, the beep boops, the Star Trek noises, right, are basically the electrical signals that are sent through the mushrooms, right? And it's a way of basically creating some kind of communication, music, whatever you want to call it, with these particular mushrooms, right? So I'll just keep playing it for a sec just so you see it in action. It's kind of hypnotizing, isn't it? So it goes on like that for like 5 minutes. I'm not necessarily gonna play.
Reminds me of that old song by Jefferson Airplane.
Of all the things that we were going to talk about in class, I never thought we were going to talk about Jefferson Airplane. But yeah, White Rabbit. Yeah, the kind of
nice song.
Yeah,
Nice people.
yeah. The psychedelic
Indeed.
type of thing. Yep, good. So, I chose the example of mushrooms here in part because of what Emmett Singh's book is about. But you see people do this with all kinds of actual plants and things. I went to a conference, I think it was last year. Yeah, last year or the year before, in Boston, and someone had done something similar. This was her PhD project, was basically figuring out what to do with this information. But what she had done was do something similar, but with trees. Right? She had taken a specific type of tree, and basically instead of the electrical currents that they just generate, right? In so far as the mushrooms do, what she measured was what scientists now believe are communications between trees, right? So there are signals and currents that trees we kind of know pass between themselves through their root systems, right? Um, and what she did was take those currents, right, those currents of communication between different types of trees and different beings, and turn them um, into different sounds like this, and even turn them into different voices, right? So she associated a certain sound with a specific word, right? Kind of arbitrarily. But what it created was like a repetition of words like hello, 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 and so on, right? It was kind of interesting. I don't know what other word to put to it than bizarre and also kind of cool, right? The idea of giving a technologically oriented voice to just the purely natural in this sense is kind of fascinating to me and kind of lives rent free in my mind. And I don't quite know what to do with it yet, but I think it does tie into some of the concerns that we're going to be discussing today with these texts. And also, as a bit of a foreshadowing, it will probably be something that we come back to when we talk about the tiger flu, right? More so on the second week that we talk about the tiger flu than on the first week, right? The first week I'm planning on talking more about, what was I going to say? Like the virus element of it, the actual flu, right? That constitutes the tiger flu. And the second week, more of like the blend of, physical and technological that appears throughout. And so, on top of being a good introduction to some of the topics for today, what I want us to consider as far as these texts and these ideas that I'm slowly starting to introduce is that right around now, we're week 6 now, week 7. We are hitting obviously the halfway point of the semester. And you can think of this as a thematic halfway point as well, right? A lot of what we've talked about before and what we will talk about going forward kind of condenses itself in a nice little bow here, right? I don't know if nice little bow is a good term, right? But a bow that exists in the form of poetry here. Does that make sense so far to everyone? Yeah? Okay. Let me just look at my notes. I think that's the only clip I wanted to show for today. Yeah. Okay, so most of you at least read or looked at The Mushroom at the End of the World, or the excerpt that I put up. How do we get from talking mushrooms and electronic mushrooms, Bjork mushrooms, to put it in your terms? Bjork mushrooms, that's a good one. Yeah. Bjork shrooms? Doesn't matter. How do we get from electronic mushrooms to this, right? Anna Tsing's kind of mushroom at the end of the world, her contemplation of this. What are some of the main ideas that you got out of what you've read from Tsing, and how does this tie into this brief 15-minute intro that I just kind of brought up? You can start in like the most basic senses of like, what was this actually about, right? What is the mushroom at the end of the world? Considering, right, based off what you read. We can start there.
I think it's all about its resilience, considering what we have been through.
Yeah.
We are in a process of, let's just say, in progress, in constant progress. And this progress is kind of hitting us back. And no matter what happens, the mushrooms are there. They kind of survive.
Yeah, good. Can we really call it progress if it's hitting us back in the way that you're saying? Because I think you're right. We are like getting slapped back,
Yeah, that's right.
right? In a
As a result
in
of
an awful way.
our covetous dreams and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah. But I think it's something worth considering. I'm not necessarily expecting you to answer now because that could be the subject of an entire book, right? Are we actually progressing? But it is something to consider, right? The use of that term, especially in relation to what Tsing is talking about. Yeah. Sorry, you were laughing. Did you have something that you wanted to add,
It's
Alicia?
just this concept of writing a book on are we progressing?
Mhm.
I was like, ooh, that would be a really big book.
I mean, I say that you could. People have. People have absolutely written that book. But I mean, I guess if you really want to make a philosophical point about it, a lot of German idealists in the 19th century kind of wrote that, even if they didn't use that term specifically, right? Yeah. Famously Hegel, right? That we've kind of oversimplified as thesis, antithesis, synthesis, has a basic understanding of the world as progressing through cycles of boom and bust, if you will, right? To put it again in an oversimplified way, right? So this is something that has been addressed for a few hundred years, but can continue to be unpacked. But I like that, Marcio, right? A contemplation on resilience, right? What resists? What is resilient? Right. Famously, I don't know how far you got in, but I'm looking at page 3 here. And it's the same pages that you have in your PDF, right? There's only one edition of this book. Just after the little design that she puts in, where she writes, when Hiroshima was destroyed by an atomic bomb in 1945, it is said that the first living thing to emerge from the blasted landscape was a matsutake mushroom. I don't know if I'm pronouncing matsutake correctly because my Japanese is non-existent, but we'll keep it at that. So even in the face of the greatest destructive force that the world had seen up until that point, right, there is something that survives, right, or something that relives, I should say, because it, I assume, was razed to the ground along with everything else, right? But something grows anew. Good. Anything else that we got from that excerpt? Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Yeah. You don't need to lift your hand, by the way, in this class. It's absolutely okay.
I feel like they both project that idea of either it be the matsutake mushroom or the ones in the video that they're part of a third nature.
Nice.
Where
Good.
Capitalism doesn't have any reverberations on them in the least. The matsutake lives nonetheless, and so do these mushrooms. They communicate without human implication.
Nice. I like that, third nature. Did you come up with that on your own, or are you taking that from someone? It's in that. I don't remember that in the text. I believe you. I just don't remember it. Pretty early in the text, yeah.
It defines what is first, second, and third.
Oh, yes. I know what you're talking. Yes. I have to find the exact page, but yes. Yes, never mind. But yeah, third nature. Kind of separated from humanity or in some way, shape, or form. Do you have the exact page so I don't need to if you happen to
on page 8 of the enabling entanglements, so it's the second page of the book, basically.
Mm-hmm. No, I believe you. I'll just slowly look for it. Oh, okay. So you're in the prologue. Sorry.
Yeah.
In that. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yes. Good. Imagine first nature to mean ecological relations, including humans, and second nature to refer to capitalist transformations of the environment. This usage, not the same as more popular versions, derives from William Cronin's Nature's Metropolis. My book then offers third nature, that is, what manages to live despite capitalism. Right? And I think that specific passage will tie us in very nicely to Forage, right? Both foraging as a practice, right? Which I think can be interesting to talk about if you've ever done it or not. but also the poetry itself, right, as an act of foraging and an act of considering what lives despite capitalism, right? Good, very good. I think when she says not the same as more popular versions, right? What comes to mind for me, we've kind of left this by the wayside because we no longer live in that world. But what comes to mind is first, second, and third world, right? The most common one that we now use is first and third world, right? What do those refer to? Do we remember? Or do we know? Yeah.
From what I use, well, yeah. Not use, but like no, it's like the first world is like the most developed nations, yeah. Whereas like the third world countries are like behind beautiful nations.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So usually, to put it in perhaps crude terms that shouldn't necessarily be used, developed and underdeveloped nations, right? So broadly speaking, global north, right? Canada would be considered a first world nation, whereas I don't know, Botswana would be considered a third world nation, for example. What's the second world? We kind of now have like first and third. When do we refer to second world?
It's like developing countries. Like
now, yes. Yeah. When it was first created, that's not what it meant.
Would it be like the emerging ones that became suddenly part of the global economic trade?
Yeah, again, that's kind of how we use it in the modern sense.
Yeah.
When it first, when the terms first, second, and third world first began, that's not what it meant.
I like just guessing. Maybe it's other like Western countries that are just not as developed as the first ones.
Right. So you're all kind of saying like variations on this.
Like the availability of like resources and like
used to refer to this communist bloc. Right. So first world was capitalism. Second world was the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Right. Broadly speaking. Third world was everything else, basically. Everything else, the world that had not decided one side or the other was basically what it was, right? To put it in kind of post-colonial terms, a lot of what we came to know as third world countries, so Africa, Asia, South America, etc., were countries that both the first world and second world were trying to bring under their influence, right, in some way or another. Right.
But
go ahead, please.
This definition of second world still stands?
Not really, because there's no such thing as a country that's trying to lead towards socialism or communism. At least, maybe if you want China, right?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Maybe. This is not the class where we're going to have that debate as to whether or not China is an actually existing socialist country. But usually the term has kind of gone by the wayside now to mean what the three of you were bringing up as developing countries or countries in development. Right. But it is interesting to consider. I think. This use of first, second, and third also in relation to these notions of how we understand the development of certain nations, right? Where we often consider first world countries, right, the most developed and the ones that capitalism benefits the most, right? We here in North America are considered first world nations because we've managed to come out on top, as we talked about last week, in this global capitalist world, right? We're the ones that exploit other people rather than the ones who are being exploited necessarily, right? And yet what she's doing here in this section that we read out loud is offer a kind of inversion, right? I think without explicitly saying it, what she's doing here is offering us or demanding that we look at this notion of first world as great and on top, right? And saying, well, what we actually have is a third nature, right? Things that exist in spite of everything that we're doing, right? In order to be on top, right? We are Just to take, again, the Canadian example, right? We're kind of destroying our north, right, with mines and so on, right? And yet things continue to exist in spite of that, right? Or there's resistance on the face of the planet and by the planet to these specific practices. And I think that this idea of resistance and resilience is one that we're going to kind of keep in the back of our mind throughout the rest of today's class, right? Because I think that's the central theme of Wong's Forage, right? Even if she's not talking about explicit resilience and resistance in the sense of like blowing up a pipeline necessarily, right? That's not the type of resistance that she's talking about. Although I wouldn't necessarily put it past her. I say that having met her, but it's something that we can talk about a little bit before, like her inclinations. But that's really, really good. I'm just looking at my notes here. What else did we get? So there's resilience I like. Some of the notes that I have are for later parts of the book that I kind of wrote down after having listened to an interview with Tsing. But there's two other terms that I think are good to think of in relation to the section that I asked you to read.
I think you were talking about that conception of a semblance.
Good. Yep.
What is the full name of that?
Assemblage, yeah.
Yes, assemblage.
Where is that?
At the end of the she's explaining how it works or the definition of this term there.
Yep. If anyone finds assemblage.
That's the thing.
Yeah, we're looking for it now.
Polyphonic assemblage. It's on the page.
The pages are at the top.
23.
23. Okay, I was not at all in the right section.
No, not.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Polyphonic assemblage.
Yep. There we go. At the bottom. Yeah. Or ish. Yeah, good. Patterns of unintentional. I'm reading halfway through the page on 23 here. Patterns of unintentional coordination develop in assemblages. To notice such patterns means watching the interplay of temporal rhythms and scales in their divergent lifeways that gather. Surprisingly, this turns out to be a method that might revitalize political economy as well as environmental studies. Assemblages drag political economy inside them and not just for humans. Keyword here, not just for humans. Plantation crops have lives different from those of their free-living siblings. Cart horses and hunter steeds share species, but not lifeways. Assemblages cannot hide from capital and the state. They are sites for watching how political economy works. If capitalism has no teleology, we need to see what comes together, not just by prefabrication, but also by juxtaposition. She uses a term here, teleology. Who can tell me what that means? It relates to what Marcio was talking about earlier.
I had to look it up. I never wrote a definition here.
So teleology is basically the idea that you're working towards a specific goal, right? So to operate teleologically would be, to use Marcio's term, an act of progress, right? We are progressing as a community, a society, a person, a thing towards this particular horizon, right? That would be a teleological move. Right? Now, what she's saying is kind of what we were talking about before, right? If capitalism has no teleology, so it exists not for a specific goal, but just to continue its own existence, right? It exists to generate wealth for like 3 people in a trench coat stacked on top of each other, right? And she's using the concept of assemblage here, which I think was rightfully raised, as a kind of alternative to this, right? Or a way of thinking otherwise, right? Not as completely removed from the world that we live in, right? I think she's quite explicit about this, that assemblages cannot hide from this planet and this world as we know it, but can offer us different ways of thinking through and considering. Okay. Now, the question then becomes, let's see if I can actually find it here, to show you an image instead of doing another one of my famously bad drawings. What does assemblage have to do with mushrooms? Why is she bringing it up in relation to this? Does anyone know what a mushroom, like how a mushroom assembles or acts like an assemblage? Like, what's the connection there, biologically speaking? It's fine if you don't know, right? It's just...
Like, is it its patchiness?
It's what, sorry?
Its patchiness.
Okay, good. What do you mean?
Like, what was the question?
Yeah, so why does she bring up mushrooms in relation to assemblages, right? Like, where's the connection there?
I think
so
it's
patchiness, I think, is one of them. Yeah,
like
you can...
it's like non-linear.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Has anyone ever seen, like, what a mushroom root system looks like? No?
No.
It's so cool. Mushrooms are great, by the way. So, yeah, I think I'll just use this image here. It's an artist representation of this, but it's here. I'll actually, no, wrong. I'll show you two images. Open image in new tab. And
I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead.
Patrick, but at the very beginning of this text here,
yeah,
she is actually actually thanking the people who helped her in order to make this work here.
Yeah, good.
And she's drawing an analogy how the mushrooms are formed in relation to the soil, how it's connected, all the chemical and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think the assemblage here is just like the mushroom is formed.
Yeah.
Basically like what you are going to show.
Absolutely. So both of what you're bringing up, Aya and Marcio, is really good. I like the idea of connecting, right? But also the idea, Aya, that you were bringing up of patches, right? Because when we look at a mushroom, right, or a series of mushrooms, they often do come in patches. Yeah, we don't look outside and see mushrooms everywhere. Yeah, we don't walk on mushrooms like we walk on grass, right? They do appear in patches. But their root system, right, is connected beyond patches, right? This is like a small scale thing, of course. I don't know if you can see properly. Yeah, okay. So what we have here are different types of mushrooms connected by a root system, right? And that's kind of what we're getting at with the assemblages, right, in its relation to mushrooms here. So the idea that different beings and different species and different types of, in this case, mushrooms, but people as well, as to come up with what you were, to come back to what you were saying, Marcio, assemble, right, with different root systems and different connections in order to create new systems, right, new assemblages. Right? And what I was thinking of, even though in that introduction she doesn't really bring them up, but she brings them up tangentially, what I was thinking of is a pair of philosophers called Félix Guattari and Gilles Deleuze. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of them. Classic French kind of hippie thinkers, I guess you would call them. Not hippie. I think they would kind of hate the hippies, but they use the idea of assemblages and mushrooms in very similar ways, right? They use the term rhizomes instead, but it's basically the same idea, right? For our purposes here, it's kind of the same idea, where they're imagining different collections of beings and connections of beings, collections and connections here, that are connected in ways that are sometimes imperceivable by the human eye, right? A lot of these root systems are invisible to us, right? They happen underneath the ground. And yet it allows for a system of existence, like patches of mushrooms, to exist across the planet, right? In like this vast communicative network. Okay. Have I lost you? Or are we good so far? We're good?
Yeah,
Still conscious. So conscious. Okay. That is good. That is the bare minimum. Consciousness, just left awake by an IV. But yeah, so that's what came to my mind is this rhizomatic idea that Deleuze and Guattari bring up. And they were thinking of this at a very specific moment in time. Yeah. So they were writing a lot of their stuff in the 60s and 70s, right? When a lot of movements were kind of exploding, especially in the Western world, but especially in what we call third world, right? But also in the Western world, right? First world, quote unquote. So they are looking at a lot of these moments of explosion, right, and activism, and thinking of what would be the best mode of resistance, right, to a world that they were considering was highly regimented, right? They were writing at a moment in France where Charles de Gaulle was still in power, right, for a lot of it, and was imposing a less democratic form than the French necessarily wanted, for example. And so they were kind of acting and thinking through what it would mean to go against capitalist hegemony, right, that was imposed on people in radically new social forms, right? And they found inspiration in mushrooms, right? Which seems like a thing that you would consider kind of while just meditating heavily with some peyote, but they were completely lucid when they were thinking of this, right? And part of what they were inspired by, which we are not going to get into here, was clinical practice and psychological practice, right? And to them, the quote-unquote neurotic, right, that they saw in their clinical practice was somewhat of an influence, if you will, right? Someone who rejected any kind of imposed community norms, right, or social norms. So it's a bit anarchic in that sense. Yeah, so like I said, we're not going to necessarily get into like the whole idea of why their clinical practice was important to them, but it just goes to show what their influences were here. So yeah, mushrooms. I don't know how I was going to finish this idea. Yeah, assemblages. Good. So that's what Singh and others are talking about, right, when they're considering assemblages, right? Patches of connected communities, right, of things, human and non-human alike. I guess to give a really good example, have any of you watched the excellent TV show The Last of Us?
No, but it did came to mind with the mushroom thing.
Yeah. Marcio, no. No, okay. It's great. Season 1, phenomenal television. I'm not someone who recommends a lot of TV generally, but...
Well, what's the name again?
The Last of Us.
It's on Crave.
Yeah. Or on very legal websites that you can acquire for... Yeah. But the basic idea is kind of interesting with... the only reason I bring it up is that it's basically a zombie show, right? Even though they refuse to use the term zombie because they're cowards, I guess. But it's basically a zombie show where the root of the zombie infection, quote unquote, is mushrooms.
Yeah.
Right? And the only reason I bring it up here is because you see throughout the show how the mushrooms communicate with one another as spores and root systems that travel miles. Right? So like one zombie that's infected can communicate to another zombie that's infected like 10 miles away. Right, with the right root system. And it's kind of cool, and that's actually how mushrooms do operate. They kind of piggyback off of their own root systems and other root systems to communicate with different things. which again is something that both Singh and Deleuze and Guattari are. It's so weird to say his name in English, Guattari, right? Are thinking through whenever they're thinking of radical ways of rethinking society, right? It's modes of communication and modes of being that are other, right? Implicitly. Okay, so that was a rant on assemblage. What is the other term that's important for Tsing? It's another A term that she brings up for a bit. Not Anthropocene, by the way, before anyone says Anthropocene. Yeah. There's another...
That's the one I was going to say.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Anthropocene is important, but we'll just say that Anthropocene is kind of implied throughout all that we're talking about here. There's a term that we haven't really discussed in class before, but that's another A term. Let's see what page it's on. I think, if I remember correctly, she brings it up in the prologue, but I'm not sure anymore. Or maybe in the... First nature, no. Okay, hold on. I'm going to look in the index instead of going back and forth like an idiot. Here we go.
Is it alienation?
Yes, it's alienation. Yeah. Okay, I was on the right page. Good. So, alienation. She brings it up. I'm on page 5 and 6, right? So the section just before this little drawing here, if you're looking for it, that whole section before that, that's where she talks about alienation. Why is alienation important to Tsing? And again, I'm bringing it up not because it's the only term, but because it's the one that's going to be, I think, most useful for us when we talk about Wong later.
Can I just read off my notes?
Please.
He links the concentration of wealth in capitalism to the process of alienation, where the entanglements of livings did not matter to the family while assets.
Yeah. Good. So, here we go. Sorry. So, yeah, absolutely. On the bottom of page 5, right, to kind of put it in different terms to what you were saying very well, Aya, the history of the human concentration of wealth through making both humans and non-humans into resources for investment, right? So that turning into, right, or that transformation, right, into a thing, right, that has no agency, right, is alienation, right? That transition point would be, if we want to call it that way, the act of alienating something, right? Another way of, or if you want to use a synonym, right, alienation is often used along similar terms as feeling disconnected, right, or feeling separated in some way, shape, or form, right? Tsing references him, but it's famously used in Marx, right, Karl Marx, when he talks about alienated labor, right? She's talking about it along ecological terms, of course, but the idea is, co-adjacent, if you want to use that idea, right? Where for Marx, the idea was to discuss how people put work into whatever they produce, right, in the factory, but because they've been so separated from the actual method of production, right, they're just a cog in a wide-ranging machine, right, that you don't actually feel connected to whatever you're actually producing, right? Where before someone was able to put all of their life effort into making, I don't know, a pretty chair, right? Now all you're doing is one saw movement all day, right? And you feel absolutely no joy or connection with the chair that now you're making one small part of, right? And this idea is taken up by Tsing and again, kind of extended both to humans, right? Human labor, human action, human agency, right? On this planet, and non-humans, right? The Matsutake mushroom that she talks about is no longer a being in and of itself, but this commodity that is collected and given as gifts in Japan, or an investment in whatever the hell people invest in these days, right? I don't know how you invest in mushrooms, formally speaking. I don't know if I actually want to know, because that would seem depressing to me to invest in a mushroom. But the idea, nonetheless, is there. Anything else we wanted to add on the idea of alienation? There's a few other things that can kind of talk about, but does that clarify things so far? Okay. The other part, again, at the bottom of page 5, a few lines after what I had read earlier, that I think is good to keep in mind. Alienation obviates living space entanglement. The dream of alienation inspires landscape modification in which only one standalone asset matters. Everything else becomes weeds or waste. How many of you have lived in the suburbs before? Yeah. Okay, good. It's depressing, isn't it? Living in the suburbs. I don't know. I find it depressing.
It's depressing, but you also feel like you're in this like protected cocoon.
That's what's depressing about it.
I don't know.
Okay.
When I was a kid and whenever we'd come to Montreal, I'd have like this gut feeling in my stomach.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like everything is so big and you feel like it's all gonna fall on you.
Oh, Montreal, you mean?
I went to New York when I was 10, and I was just like, oh my god, this is overwhelming.
Really?
Yeah.
I have the complete opposite reaction. As someone who has also lived in the suburbs for, his parents still live. My parents, I say his. I'm talking to myself in the third person.
Like, what suburbs are you talking about?
Like outside of Montreal. In this case, my parents live in Chambly.
Outside Montreal.
Yeah.
Like I'm also in the South Shore. Like, Chambly's not that far from me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Whenever I came to Montreal, like I would see like how kids are like confined, most of them to balconies. And to me, it was like, where do you play outside? Where do you go? I feel like even parks are unsafe there because like people of all ages hang out in parks. Yeah. Whereas like in the South Shore, it's strictly for children. Yeah.
The reason why I'm bringing up is not the safety reason. So, the reason why I'm bringing up suburbs is more to tie it into what Tsing is talking about in ecological terms, right? What you see in the suburbs is an ecological hellscape, basically. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is, for example, grass, right? Which you don't think of, right, in your everyday life, I assume, right? Nobody thinks of grass in their day-to-day life except deeply depressed people like me. But But the reason why I'm bringing up grass is like it's extremely unhealthy for the environment, right? But it's pretty, right? And that's why, or it's considered pretty, right? And clean and beautiful, right? And that's why it's highly encouraged, right, in the suburbs, right? To the point where there are actual laws in places like Chambly and Brossard where you cannot put other things than grass in certain areas. Right. And anything outside of lawn, right, or grass, this thing that just sucks up water like there's no tomorrow, right, and is extremely damaging to the soil, right, is considered a weed, right? Anything else. Right? And you see these people, and again, I've seen this firsthand from my mom and other neighbors, right? These people obsessing over the active removal of any other form of life, right? Except this very, very specific, non-alienated piece of grass, right? And that's what comes to mind when I think of like land alienation, right? Or even in the suburbs, right? Again, to just take that example one more time, to come back to the idea of assemblage, much more then in the city, I feel like you don't talk to your actual neighbor, right? Like the way that the suburbs are planned out and organized is an active act of separation from whatever community you've decided to establish yourself in, right? Take the example of the white picket fence, right, of the American dream, right? You have like this very clear delineation of where my property begins and when yours ends. And I have seen what were, admittedly tenuous relationships to begin with, but I have seen relationships begin and end over where that inch lies, right, between one property and another, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about alienation, right? Being so disconnected from the world around you that you're only basing yourself on a very particular and normalized way of imagining your environment. Right? Now, again, I'm using this example of the suburbs that may not register for a lot of you. Maybe you have a completely different experience of the suburbs, right? I'm using it as an example that makes sense to me, but I think, again, you can probably fill in any other environment that you're thinking of, and you'll probably find some level of reality to this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Entirely.
My diatribes about the suburbs aside, I do like my parents and like where they live. So I should specify this. Anything else that we want to add so far? Okay.
I don't know. I just had a lot of memories come back.
Yeah. Have I ruined the suburbs for you?
No,
Okay.
they're fine. Also, we have a forest around.
Yeah.
It's less
alienating.
looking.
Yeah. I don't have forests.
Yeah, it is very far away.
Yeah.
The north.
Oh, okay.
It's still where they don't need that much.
Yeah. This is going to sound really conspiracy brained, and I promise this is not. What convinced me that, at least in North America, a lot of suburbs are very alienating, at least, again, for me speaking personally, is knowing that historically, post-World War II, they were actively encouraged as spaces where people can deliberately not connect to one another, right? And this was actually, and there's documented proof of this, right? It's actually part of a conceited effort to make kind of activism that was very prevalent in the cities post-World War II diminished, right, in North America, right? Because in places like New York or great metropolises, it was a lot easier to connect and to find, right, some kind of like-minded person, right? Because there was a high density of population, right, that you can talk to and, have your grievances about and so on and so forth. And to actually disperse people is an excellent way of making that diminished, right?
My dad actually told me before that in the 90s, in the papers, they would do some moving to the South Shore, propaganda, made it sound like a haven.
Yeah.
It's peaceful, it's quiet, your kids are safe, there's schools and parks everywhere. Yeah. And that's through that propaganda that they get families to move out of Montreal.
Yeah. It's not, again, it sounds kind of like conspiracy brained, but no, you're absolutely right. Those were ads that exist and still exist on some level today, right?
I think people also like to stick around conspiracy to ridicularize really concrete ideologies.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good. I like that point. I don't know what to add to it. Just yes. That is very good. So if no one has any, go ahead.
There is this idea of always, I think she comes back more than once to open our imagination.
Yes, good.
And this idea of collaborative survival that comes back often, that I'm
what page are you looking at?
It appears on page 19, but I know it appears again later a little bit.
Yeah.
And it is related to everything we've been saying. So there's this part.
If I may, I
Go for
think
it.
I have
Yeah,
something that works with what you're saying here. A few years into the new century, the idea of a trade-off between jobs and the environment seemed less convincing. With or without conservation, there were fewer jobs, quote unquote, in the 20th century sense in the United States. Besides, it seemed much more likely that environmental damage would kill all of us, jobs or no jobs. We are stuck with the problem of living despite economic and ecological ruination. Neither tales of progress nor of ruin tell us how to think about collaborative survival. It is time to pay attention to mushroom picking, not that this will save us, but it might open our imaginations. Is that what you were getting at? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I like that. Yeah. Did you want to say more about it since you brought up the point?
No, not really.
Okay. Right. Collaborative survival, I think, is a good term that kind of brings together a lot of the ideas that we've talked about so far, right? A collaborative survival as needing some kind of assemblage, collaborative survival as a way to obviate alienation, right? That thing that obviates in and of itself, right? And I do appreciate that she admits that this is not something that on its own is going to save us, right? Nothing, if anyone sells you a single solution to any problem, they're selling you a religion, right? And that's, I should say perhaps like a cult, right? Because even religions don't always do that, but always. But the idea of a one single solution fitting everything or resolving every problem, right, is one that is inherently faulty, right? It completely ignores the immensity of the planet, right, to come back to our core term, and it just ignores the variety of issues and communities and ideas that exist in the world, right? And I think that she does a good job here of saying that what we need, first and foremost, is to return to a willingness to imagine what is otherwise possible. Okay? And for her, the central symbol of that is the mushroom. Right? And it is also for Wong, which we're going to talk about after the break. Okay? Yep. Awesome. Right, and English universities like Concordia and McGill are suffering a lot because of they've been relying a lot on exchange students.
Right? Well, even right now, I think it's half and half, half Quebecers and then half international students.
Right. So
in McGill. Non, dans
not as much at McGill, but at Concordia, they've been really feeling the crunch on that one. Yeah. So
because I would have been surprised if it was half and half in McGill. I'm talking about the department here right now. Yeah, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics are precisely, really, but
the people that are in class with me.
Yeah, but there's a reason why the University of Montreal says Université de Montréal et du Monde. Yeah, it's because they understand, and it's totally fine that they.
It is important that you have your letters ready, the text ready, but don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't capoter. No. Yeah. They need you a little bit,
Yeah, but they need you more than you need them.
I don't know. I feel like I need them a lot. But I'm like, yeah. Not yet.
I mean, are you planning on applying to other universities?
I thought maybe McGill, but I mean, I was accepted for my bachelor, and I refused. So I feel like maybe they're gonna have a grudge. No, it doesn't. Maybe I'm just emotional.
You're a rat.
No. Do you? Not really. I mean, I felt like if I would have gone to McGill, it would have been not Canadian. I don't know how to explain it. I would have felt...
Most of their classes are on Canadian literature.
Yeah, but it's not just that. I talked about it about someone who went there, and they felt very of place.
Alienated, perhaps?
Yeah, perhaps. It was like they were in Montreal, and they just felt like it was not where they wanted to be.
Mhm.
And my parents went both here,
Mhm.
so they were just like, "Oh, this is super fun. It's a very good place."
Having taken classes at McGill before, I never did a formal degree there, but having taken classes there, I do appreciate what they're trying to do, but I do agree with your parents that I prefer this setting here a little bit more. Mostly because it's so small. Like at least you get the sense that it's a bit more of a close-knit community, even if it not always like is in reality, but it gives that feeling that I personally appreciate more. But I obviously have no skin in the game, so apply wherever you want. It doesn't matter to me.
But I especially wanted to apply to at least 2 things, because I was like, and if something happens to one, at least I have a backup. I applied here, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it went. See, it went great. I mean, you're here. But yeah, don't worry. Is all I was trying to say.
Did you find the book, A?
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, you didn't go find it. Okay.
But on Studio, it's in the syllabus, but it's not in the...
No, because I assumed paper copy, but I'm sure you can, if you look at it real quick, I'm sure you can find a digital copy of it somewhere on Anna's archive or something like that.
Where it says that it's a required reading. It's in the syllabus, but it's not on the Studio weeks, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
I just saw this thing.
Yeah, it's possible. Because I only usually on Studium I put the theoretical readings, or if there's no, I put the pictograms, the Fredwaz pictograms up because it's basically out of print. So even if you did want to get a physical copy, it would have been almost impossible.
I remember you said that.
Yeah. So that's usually what I will put on Studium, but yeah, as a general rule, if you want to get digital copies of any of the books that we're talking about and avoid paying for a new copy, go ahead. I don't care. Yeah, I don't get any kickback from the sales of the books at the. If I did get, then you would all be forced to get. No, but okay. What I wanted to start off as a bit of a discussion, and we don't have to spend that long on this question. So obviously the title is Forage, right? And I'm curious, when you think of foraging, what does that actually mean to you? Maybe a simple question, right? Obvious question to ask, but I think it does offer a lot of avenues as a response to what we're going to be talking about.
A quest for food.
Good.
Or distinct survival.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea that occurs when I see this title here.
Yep. Especially in relation to the image in the background, right?
That's right.
What is that in the background? Does anyone know?
It looks like electronic cards and phones, or...
Yeah,
I'm not exactly the expert in electronic.
It's an electronic lantern.
Mostly electronic things.
Sometimes they mention it at the back of the book, what exactly the image is of the cover, but it's probably, some landfilling. I don't know. Third world country, to come back to that term. So apparently the cover photo is by Lei Yun from Greenpeace. Yeah, so presumably some landfill on the fourth cover. Anyway, so yeah, good. Survival, food, quest for food. I like that idea of a quest. Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind?
I think of horse food.
Of horse?
Don't horses eat forage?
Oh yeah, okay, good. So they will, most animals or most farm animals will kind of dig into the soil in some way, right? Yeah. Pigs do that, for example. That's why we use them for truffles, right? To find truffles, is that some pigs are trained to actually go through just I guess what we would call some kind of foraging technique. Yeah. Good. I think sheep also do that on some level. Yeah. My knowledge of cows is limited, but I don't think cows forage. But yeah, good. So it is both a human activity and a non-human activity. Good, right?
I automatically think of oil and drilling.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, foraging into the
drills, like in the ground.
Yeah, good.
Like the big lands that are like with the la machine equipment there.
Good. So it can be both a method of survival and a method of destruction. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that she plays with a lot in this collection. Does anyone know where the term comes from? Like, if you do a bit of an etymological exercise on it, just out of curiosity, you don't need to look it up now if you don't know.
It doesn't sound Latin.
No, it doesn't.
Although a lot of things don't sound Latin, and then you go back and you're like, oh, okay, so you just went through like a million shifts in the. So the original meaning behind it is associated to hay and straw, right? The collecting of hay and straw. So it comes back to the horse and animal farming element that you were bringing up, Aya. But it also refers to fodder, right? What does fodder mean?
How'd you spell that?
Fodder.
Oh, it's a D. Okay.
Yeah, no, not fodder. Yeah. I'm not mispronouncing the Dutch word for dad.
Hearing a little G like fogger, and I was like, what?
Yeah. So fodder is food for animals, right? Like hay and straw. But it's interesting because in the contemporary sense, right, to be fodder is to send someone to slaughter, basically, right? So you might have heard it in the context of the military term, right, of human fodder or cannon fodder, right? So literally food for cannons would be what it means. And usually it refers to people who are on the front lines who are just sent out to die first, right? So even though the original term for forage would not have meant, right, so fodder in its original sense would have just meant food, yeah, it's interesting to think of how that term specifically has evolved over time, right? Again, we're doing a kind of Derridian move here of like how words alter meaning over time, and that affects our perspective on a specific term retroactively, right? So it can be both, again, to come back to what we were saying here, a sense of survival and living, but also inherently associated to death now, right, and destruction.
Sure.
And again, the idea of fodder, right, is one that I think Wong plays into explicitly, and I was looking up some critical reactions to this text, and there's one by Linda Mora, who's an excellent scholar in British Columbia, in Canadian literature, and she put it in a way that I think is really helpful to think of this collection, where she put it as Rita Wong positions us as readers with a very specific choice: to forage, or to be fodder. Right? And I think that's one that we should keep in mind throughout our kind of brief readings of her poetry here and there. Right? This obviously brings us back to what we were talking about with Sing earlier, right? Of the choices that we have to make as a collective, right? Or as an assemblage, or as a human, non-human society, right? What do we actually do with the incredible imagination that we've been given as humans or as non-humans? And what do we do with it? Okay. Anything else that comes to mind as foraging? I have one last point that I want to relate back to our very first class-ish. Second class.
Second class?
I don't think you were there.
Yeah,
I'm basically talking to the two of you.
What was the...
Yeah, what was the topic of the second class? Shelley and Blake.
Yeah, was it the romanticism class? I'm so mad I missed that.
But I record all the lectures, so you'll be able to listen.
That's
Yeah.
Just
because you weren't there, by the way, doesn't mean you can't talk about it if you want, like your critical readings or your.
That's good.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm confused. Was it about the first class or the second?
So our first official class, right?
Okay, so the
second week. Yeah.
So about the poems.
More of like the context of the poems. So this is like a really tenuous connection, and I'm asking you to remember like a month and a half of classes ago. So don't worry about it.
Industrialization.
Good. Industrialization.
So, like foraging,
like mining, the training.
Yeah.
Okay, good. There was a specific event that I mentioned as happening at the end of the Middle Ages into the Romantic era.
The French Revolution?
Yeah, so the French Revolution is one of them, but on an ecological level.
Industrial Revolution?
Yes, that is associated with what we call enclosures. Right? Do you remember that term, Danny and Alicia?
I think I wrote it down.
Yeah.
In my notes somewhere.
Yeah.
But on the top of my head, it wouldn't have come to mind at this moment.
Yeah. So if we want to put it on a historical level, just as a brief reminder, for most of, I don't want to say ancient history, but there was, especially in the pre-modern era, broadly speaking, what we consider to be common lands, right? Just lands that everyone would have access to on some level, right? That didn't necessarily belong to a lord, that didn't necessarily belong to a private individual, right? They were the commons, right? And what we talked about in that class was that what you saw during the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries is a progressive, in a completely different sense of progress here, a progressive enclosure of those common lands, right? What we would call today privatization of those common lands, yeah, where people, especially lords who had a certain amount of disposable income, right, to use another contemporary term, would hire people with means, people with weapons, right, I should say, to block off certain areas of what was formerly common land and make it private land, right, for their use. Right? And the reason why I bring this up in relation to this is that a lot of people used those common lands as a place to forage as well, right? Yes, it was used for agricultural purposes, right? But foraging historically was a practice, right, that a lot of people just did, right, as part of their way of being. And as an extension of the enclosure acts that are happening, or the acts of enclosure, I should say, is that you basically get a historic limitation on people's abilities to forage, right? Where trespassing becomes a offense, right? Because you're going on someone else's property where previously it just was everyone's property, right? And so to take this even further, at first, this would have been a civil offense, relatively minor, right? And in a lot of cases, I'm thinking especially in the United States, although here too on some level, it becomes a criminal offense at times, right? So it's even more of a big deal, right, when you trespass on someone else's property, right, in order to just collect a mushroom, for example. Right? Because obviously that person was going to do a lot with their mushroom, right? I'm making a joke about it. But what's really interesting, and I guess another connection with Wong can be made, is that this would often also impact minority populations, right? And what you see historically, and this is much later, and I'm thinking post-American Civil War, right, where a lot of newly free slaves, right, newly freed former slaves, didn't have access to their own property necessarily and would have had to rely on foraging, right, were actually historically and legally limited from doing that, right? So it becomes almost a radical act in that sense to forage on property that had been common, stopped being common, and now symbolically was highly privatized, right? And the people who need it most use it as a kind of radical act in order to survive, right? Or live. Why this fits in with Wong is, well, of course, on one level, she is what we would call part of an ethnic minority, right, in Canada, as a Chinese Canadian. But also, she explicitly brings up questions of race in relation to foraging and extractive capitalism in this book, both Asian populations, but also indigenous populations as well, right? So this is just me kind of launching a bunch of different ideas that I want to connect for the next part of class, basically. Any questions so far? Does this all make sense to people? I obviously don't want to spend like a whole lot of time going over the history of foraging as a radical act necessarily, but I think it's useful to have that kind of grounding here. Yeah. Have any of you actually ever foraged? Purely out of curiosity, I ask. It's kind of fun. No?
Speaking of an apple counts from a tree.
Collecting apples. Mm-hmm.
Is it an apple that was on your property?
No.
I would call that a part of foraging, like a minor act of foraging.
Just your flower.
Yeah.
Flower counts? Yeah, flower counts.
So usually when people forage, obviously just picking up a flower to like smell it or anything like that, not necessarily. But what's interesting about foraging is that, which, I have nothing against flowers or cool to just smell it. But when people usually talk about foraging, they talk about picking things up in order to actually do something with it, right? So picking up a flower, let's say dandelions, right, which are everywhere here, and what a lot of people would consider a pest, and I don't know, making a salad out of it, right? Which is totally fine. You should try it one time. It's actually kind of good, right? Or people make... Yep, they're entirely edible. Some people make alcohol out of various plants, right, including dandelions, to come back to that example. So there's all kinds of practices that are done with foraging that are meant to be consumptive on some level, right, actually, existing, without being extractive, right, because you're not necessarily doing it on a scale that is overwhelmingly destructive like contemporary agriculture might be, right? You're doing it mostly for your own little sustainable life.
It's considered as foraging.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So usually when people forage, it's not for like to resell the dandelions that they found on the ground. It's just to like, hey, let's have this for supper tonight or whatever. Right? Which is kind of cool. It's something that I've personally been like, it'd be kind of fun to do it, but then I remember that I live in a city and it's very difficult to actually do that. But city-based foraging is a thing that people do, but it is more difficult just because the obvious places would be in like parks or anything like that, but parks are extremely curated, right? Like people spend an enormous amount of money, time, and labor actually making sure that it looks as pristine as possible, right? Rather than just letting nature do its thing.
Because would it count as foraging if it's foraging for garbage? Like a person
like dumpster diving?
Yeah, like they're going, but not necessarily dumpster diving, but just like things that are put on the side of the road for before the trash pick them up, like huge couches and other things like that, and they just keep it. Like I don't know a person who does that.
I would call that a form of like city foraging.
Yeah,
why
because
not?
it's not literally
You're not picking up like a natural resource,
but it's picking up stuff and using it for yourself or like transferring it. Some people do DIY stuff with those things.
Yeah.
So,
then there's a whole economy about economy. That's not the right term here because it's not it's not for resale necessarily. I know I found this before of a map that was made specifically for the island of Montreal by some person. to tell you like where the best spots are for like dumpster diving or other places. It's like, in this place on Monday, Wednesdays, they put this out. They put like fruits and vegetables out or something like that. And in this place on Thursdays, they put, I don't know, like their bread out or whatever. Yeah. And I actually have a friend of mine who does that regularly and basically spends nothing on groceries because people throw out most of what is like perfectly good groceries. Yeah.
No.
So I would actually, absolutely consider that a form of foraging. Yeah. But that's me personally. I'm sure like an actual forager would be like, no, you're crazy. But I don't know.
But it's like the act counts, maybe not in the same
in a literature class.
But
No, but I think the act absolutely is important here.
Yeah.
It's not just a question of idealizing or thinking of what foraging is capable of, but the actual performance of it, I think, is very important, right? The actual willingness to go out and engage with the world around you on some form is, I think, inherently part of what foraging entails. Yeah. So last week we left off with Fred Waugh's pictograms of the interior of BC, and I asked you to think of what might be the connection here with Waugh, right? So obviously there's the connection of Asian Canadian poets. Yeah, haha. So there's that like obvious connection, sure. Asian Canadian poets of two different generations, right? Wong would have been the next generation of Chinese Canadians after Waugh. But in reading Forage, did we come up with any other kind of relations between Waugh and Wong?
In terms of form,
yes.
There are similitudes.
Good.
Yeah. So like in the shapes of like the poems, on page 44. Or even, I think there's like one word here with letters missing. It engages with symbols as well, like on pages 33 and 34.
Yeah. Yeah, good. So on the formalistic level, absolutely. Engaging with playing around with what poetry actually is, right? When we talked about the Romantics, it's a highly formalized, in many ways, style of poetry, right? They're playing with rules, right? And they're playing around a little bit with it, but not as much as Waugh or Wong would come to play around with it. Absolutely. So yes, there is like the dropping of letters, right? As on the example of Fester on page 44, you're right. But also engaging across cultures, right? The Chinese symbols, right? Or word symbols. Or, of course, much like Waugh was doing, talking across cultures with indigenous peoples that more than Waugh, maybe, right? Wong is highly aware that she's writing as a settler, right? She is firmly aware of her history as someone who came to this country, right? Or whose family came to this country. And that doesn't stop her from writing poetry about and on this land, but it is something that is in the background and sometimes in the foreground of her poems, is that she is on inherently stolen land, right? Which makes the whole idea of forage even more interesting, right? How do you actually forage on land that historically was stolen from someone else, right? Which is maybe something that you can think of. The other connection that I made that I think is perhaps, I don't know if it's perhaps like too far of a reading. We can maybe talk about it. We'll see. Is that Waugh's poetry, to me, this is not something that we brought up last time explicitly, although I had it in my notes and we just never got around to it. Is that Waugh's poetry was a very interior poetry, right? It's one that's concerned with how something makes you feel, how something makes you think, right? And what it tells you about yourself, right? When I say it, it's the pictograms that he was responding to, of course. Whereas I feel like Wa's poetry is more exterior in that sense, right?
I mean, Wong.
Wong, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Wong's poetry. The W is confusing. Wong. So whereas Wong's poetry is much more exteriorized, right? So instead of taking the exterior and channeling it through her particular perspective, like Wa does, she's taking her interior perspective and channeling it outwards. Right? But that's something that came to my mind. I don't know if it's also something that that you also thought of, but I just think that it's something that we can kind of think through passively. Okay. For those of you who read part or all of it, actually, I don't think anyone read all of it yet.
No, I read all of it.
You read all of it. Okay.
I understood all of it, but definitely read all of some of the words. Yeah.
Are there poems that stuck out to you? Right, because kind of like Wa, I don't know where we're gonna. There's not a specific place that we can or must stop.
I
feel like please.
About the list of remedy, which I searched.
Which page are you on? 33.
33. I searched like every one of these words.
Good.
Because I did not understand where it's going. It's not all remedies. It's like a list of remedies.
Page 33, Marcia.
I did not really understand what she was doing with this, honestly.
So, anyone here speak Mandarin? Okay, good. So, we're going to rely on your translations of what you found. Okay. Alicia, go for it.
Basically, it's all medicinal herbs or plants or roots, and I just checked basically what he did because I was very confused. I was like, what is this?
Good. Yeah. That's good. So what did you find?
The first one is a Chinese roots for intestinal issues.
Good.
There's a fungus. There's roots for blood circulation, menstrual pain. There's a tuber vegetable, which is kind of like a potato.
Yeah.
Plants for cough, one's for liver kidneys, one that's literally just for healthy aging. I don't know if you know much about TMC. It's like a medicinal practice they do in China.
Okay.
It's more like to help when you have a really intense sickness like cancer and you go through Western medicine process with I don't know how they say it. It's really chemical and it's intense on your body. They use TMC to like subside those effects.
Okay.
So it's to help the side effects, basically, to make you feel better, be less nauseous, or just less weak.
Counter the effects.
Yeah, but they also use that medicinal stuff to help people that are gonna die just be less in pain. So it's not exactly...
It's not our topic for this week. Keep that in mind for the tiger flu. By the way, that exact thing, I would say that comes up. Even if it's not in those terms.
But those herbs are usually used in that kind of medicine to just help subside pain. Yeah, it's not to like cure anything. It's just like to help. But I don't know what way.
Good. Have any of you actually ever used like traditional medicine, quote unquote? Right? Yeah. I've been rather lucky where I haven't necessarily needed to heal much of anything in my life that hasn't required rest mostly. But the few times that I have used, I don't know, just things like traditional teas or whatever, right? Worked like a charm. Incredible stuff, right? And that's not to say that like all of it is gold. I'm not talking about like, what's the term for when they put like a single drop of something? Homeopathy, right? I'm not talking about that, right? That's a scam. But I mean, actual use of various medicinal herbs, right, in quantifiable doses, really great, at least in my experience. Have you had a similar experience, Aya? You lifted your hand. I'm saying this, by the way.
Stuff that my mom whips out.
Yeah.
Whether it be like toothache remedies or like cramps or anything of the sort.
Yeah.
Like, she has something in the back of her mouth.
Yeah. Do they actually work usually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a charm.
Yeah.
How to, like, I'm supposed to get a root canal and I keep pushing back the appointment.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I get too comfortable and chew on it and it gets really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I have tried every single Western medicine, like down to the clove oil, the pills, like anything of the sort. Only my mom's weird crushed thing with like a bunch of weird ingredients works.
Yep.
Like,
no, for sure.
It smells foul, but it works.
Yeah, that's the. But no, it's true, and I'm not here to say that like to dunk on Tylenol or whatever. Like, I will always stand for Tylenol. But I should use the non-branded version, the ibuprofen or whatever. But the idea of foraging for healing, right, or foraging as a healing practice is, I think, something that she's getting at with poems like this, to answer your question, Alicia, right? And you can have a completely different interpretation as I have, but just the way that foragers that I've spoken to or that I've read about, right, talk about the whole practice is usually one of wanting to help in some way heal the planet, right? And it comes back to this idea of countering extractive practices that we were talking about in the first half of class, right? And this kind of radical act of only taking what you need, yeah? Where in industrial farms or mining or whatever, right, we produce way too much, right? And we are exhausting the earth as a result of it, right? And when I say way too much, it is way too much because most of it is thrown out, right? It's something like 40 million tons of food is thrown out every year in the United States alone, right? Just incredible amounts of food, right? And even if we fed every single person on the planet with that food, we would still have some left over, right? So we are way overproducing as far as food is concerned, right? And that has an impact on how the planet actually acts. Is it the only impact? No, of course not. This comes back to what Singh was saying about there not being just one way of dealing with this solution, with this problem. But I think implicitly what she's getting at with this idea of remedy is foraging as remedy in some way, shape, or form. Right? So that's kind of what I got from that on a surface level. Right? Does anyone else have anything that they got from this poem? I would say that there's other stuff, but just for the sake of like launching it back to you.
I like the idea that it's like one remedy from a long series of remedies.
Good. Yep.
Like this is only like a tiny portion of what is probably possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And interesting in terms of like imagining the options that we have.
Bingo. Yeah. I think that's really good. And I'm wondering also if part of that is reflected on the linguistic level. Right, so for you, who doesn't have it necessarily in front of you.
I flipped through the pages and see there's like a...
So the poem that we're looking at has basically 3 different levels of language happening, right? Yes, it's going through like different remedies, right? As Alicia, you were bringing up, but also on one column, you have the Chinese symbols. Then you have the, I guess, Romanized version of it, of those same symbols. And then you have the Latin version of it, right? Presumably all the same thing, yeah? All the same word, all the same reference, right, or referent. But it changes our perspective on it, I would argue. How does reading different levels of language change our perspective on these medicines?
It sounds like when you have just these 2 pictograms, if you will, you have small information, less information. And if you take a look at the possible translation there, you have more information. And then maybe that, I don't know, something is missing or it was not translated as it should.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, again, we're operating as people who do not read Mandarin, right?
Yeah.
I assume it's Mandarin. Yeah. I say this assuming that it's not Cantonese or whatever. Right. I'm assuming that it's Mandarin. But that's an interesting reflex, right? We are conditioned to read something like Latin and think of it as more accurate or more information, right? It's longer, right? It's closer to the languages that we speak, right? Whether it's Portuguese, French, or English, right? I don't know if you speak Arabic. Yeah, okay, so maybe not Arabic, but the it's closer to the language that we would expect for medicine, right? A lot of medical language is in Latin, right? When we diagnose something, we tend to use the official term, which is often in Latin, or even when we talk about body parts, right? We tend to have a Latin term for it, which is the official term, even though no one has spoken Latin fluently in like 300 years or something like this. And it does give that sense of officializing, right? These remedies, right? For a Western audience in many ways, right? We still don't understand, right? Because most of us don't speak Latin. So we still don't understand what is actually being said here. You can make out a few words here and there, like rhizoma, for example. We would imagine that it's rhizome or herba, herb, radix, root, right? All of these things we can kind of associate broadly, right? But a lot of it is just kind of implied officiality. Right? And yet, in a very similar way to what Wah was doing last week, what's happening on a kind of visual level is that she's putting all of these on an equal plane, right? They are all operating exactly the same space, right, and the same kind of line, much like Wah's poetry was operating exactly the same line and lineation as the pictographs that he was talking about. Yeah. So I think on a kind of linguistic or writing level, she is very much pointing to this kind of equalizing force of putting both traditional knowledge and officialized knowledge on an equal playing field. Right? Again, I don't know if you agree with me on this, right? But that's the sense that I get when reading a poem like this. Right? And it reminds me of the very first poem, or no, not the very first poem, the second poem in the collection, right? Because the first poem is Rise, Riven, Rice, Rid, right? So I'm looking at value chain here on page 11. And the very first line, right? How to turn English from a low context language into a high context language. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow takes me back hundreds of years. The eternal frontier, my consumer patterns. What is next for you people are hard workers? What is the context? Sorry, for you people are hard workers. Electromagnetic fields of refrigerators, phone, and computer hum bewildered static. Cartons of cigarettes wait for lungs to reside in. Heaps of dolls burn for the sins of their owners. Sometimes I open my mouth and my mother's silences come tumbling out of me. Quote, they take your culture away from you. You cannot sing your own songs anymore. End quote. Utter English. The terrain has altered and Tongwa won't fit into the compartment allotted for it. So much depends on a thin iron walk. Hello, Silent Spring. Military industrial complex embedded in my imported electronics. So the whole poem is brilliant, I think, but that first line, right? How to turn English from a low context language into a high context language. right, I think ties back to this previous poem that we looked at on 33, which was called One Remedy for a Long Series of Remedies. What does that mean, that first line? What would be a high context language versus a low context language? I don't think you need to think that deeply into it. I think, but it is something that we tend to not consider on our everyday. What would be the qualities of a language that is low context? And just break it down into its bare components. Right? If something is low context, what would that imply in terms of the language? Yeah.
Maybe slangs.
Length. Good.
Slangs. Informal language.
Good. Yeah.
For example, just like you mentioned Latin. Mm-hmm. And Latin was supposed to be the language when the Romans were actually conquering the places there, but Latin was not actually learned by the people there.
Yeah.
And then
there was an administrative language.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
Good. So, on the literal sense of when we talk about context for a language, right, it's everything around the language, mm-hmm. right? So if something is low context, you don't need everything around, right? And I think it comes back, Marcio, in part to what you're saying on length, where English and other Latinized languages are languages that can be very precise, right? I can talk about something for a long period of time and not actually point to that thing, right? Because, and this is not the only language, Latinized languages are not the only languages that do this, but we're just using it here because it's the one that Wong uses. But, there's a high level of precision, right, in languages like English. Whereas what we would imagine as a high context language, right, is one that does require an attention to everything around you, right? By definition, right? If you need context, you need an attention to the history of certain words, right? You need an attention to the environment in which a specific word is spoken, right? Or even a time in which a specific word is spoken. Okay? And that's not to say that you can't do that with English on some level, right? There is a history to the language like anything else. But Wong's point here is that compared to other languages, English is one that has developed and changed over time in order to be a very low context language, right? So that everyone in the world can understand, right? It is the language, the universal language, so to speak, right? Perhaps, unfortunately, not perhaps, unfortunately, for indigenous languages across the world. But it is interesting because it ties back to to the first poem that we were reading, yeah, where all of these rows of terms, right, require quite a bit of context, right? And Alicia, you brought that context, right? You did more homework than I did on that, on it, right? You actually looked into it and looked for the context of what each of these remedies is supposed to do, right? Which is something that, because we don't speak English, because we speak English, sorry, we would have expected to have ingrained into the actual poetic practice, right? And she's kind of removing that in a very interesting way, right? By saying, no, you have to do the work of understanding the world around you as well if you're going to talk about it or engage with it poetically and linguistically. Marcio, you look confused. No.
Okay. Just taking a look at my notes here. Mm-hmm. How could I understand this afterwards? That's the thing I was figuring out here.
If it helps, this is the last poetry that we're going to be doing, so it's going to be
But it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even the second line of value chain, right? Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow takes me back hundreds of years. Right? First of all, what's that a reference to? Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Annie. Like the Annie girl. What's her name?
Annie? No. It might be Annie, but it's an even more obvious reference. Macbeth? No. Nobody's read Macbeth here.
When is Macbeth?
So Shakespeare's Macbeth in Act 5, Scene 2? Scene 1? He says that. That's his famous soliloquy, right? She should have died hereafter, and blah, blah, blah. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow is made up of nows, basically, right? It doesn't matter, right? I'm not going to start reciting a half-remembered soliloquy here, but the point is that she's making a classical reference, right, here to a well-respected and well-known English author, right, and completely removing it from its context in many ways, right? Not only by saying it takes me back hundreds of years, right, which is physically true, which is like literally true because Shakespeare wrote Macbeth 500 years ago, something like that, right? 15, whatever. And yet firmly associates it to the now, right? So disconnecting this classical author from his context and period and giving it new context, right? And a new meaning in the poetry that she's talking about here, thereby adding a kind of contextual or high context element to English. Right? I don't know if that makes sense, but I just thought that was like a cool poetic move here on Wong's part. And I'm not saying that she's doing that to like dunk on Shakespeare, not at all, right? Again, as someone that I've spoken to, I think she has like a firm respect for these authors, right? But what she's trying to think about is how do we actually contend with the past, right, deep as it may be, in the now, right, and kind of recontextualize and rethink these authors in new and revitalized ways. Good. Any other poems that jumped out to us as worthy of discussion? I say that. Hold on. Good. Before I say that, knowing that it's 10:30 and usually we take another break here, are we good to keep going just for like one more poem, or do we want to take a break?
One more poem because I think I need to the bathroom after.
Okay, one more poem. So go ahead, Marcio.
The thing I was going to say was about the page 32.
Mm-hmm.
You have there the recognition and identification task.
Mm-hmm.
And the plants here, some plants are connected to some brands, very universally, if you will, recognized brands. And if we just try to make the connection between, for example, the first pair we have there, crocus and knife, what kind of connection could we establish there? Or even the last one, blackberry and blackberry.
Yeah, black. So I'm just actually looking at the crocus flower, which is beautiful.
Yes.
So if people did not look it up, this is what it looks like. Right? Do we think of Nike when we look at a plant like that?
Not really, no.
No, right? Or holly. I'm sure we've all seen holly. It's a bit more of a common plant here in North America. But for those of you who didn't see it, we often see it around Christmas time. Right? People often get it. Is it the same thing as mistletoe? Whatever. Looks like mistletoe. Right. So you're right. We don't necessarily associate these things with kind of soulless corporations. Right. So what is she trying to say in this? I think she's trying to do two things with this type of poem. She's trying, I think, on one level to kind of force what would be the term to use here? force a kind of, I guess, a kind of alienation, right? To use that term that we brought up at first, right? Where your initial instinct would be to imagine a kind of beautiful plant and then completely separate it from its context, right? From its beauty, by associating it with a shoe company that employs sweatshop factory workers at $1 a day, right? Not at all what you'd expect from crocus. But I think on a second level, and perhaps a more interesting level, there is the implication of how a lot of companies will associate themselves with something natural and beautiful, right, in order to make their product seem more palatable, right, to the average person, right? BlackBerry is a really good one, right, at the end, BlackBerry and BlackBerry, right? What better way to sell your product than to associate with a delicious berry that you can find like at the Atwater Market or whatever on your Saturday morning groceries, right? Or on a more insidious level, right? Multinational capitalism as something inherently natural and beautiful, which you hear all the time, by the way, right? Capitalism is flawed, but it's the best system that we have, right? How many times have we heard that? I've heard it at least 3 times in the last week, right? Sorry, you look like you were going to say something here.
I always hear socialism is good in theory, but like impossible to apply.
Yeah.
Whereas like capitalism sounds terrible in theory and it's applied.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you have like all kinds of variations like that. Absolutely. But the point, right, regardless of how you kind of want to frame that expression, is that especially for the last decades, we've been conditioned to imagine the system that we live in as natural, right? And often the greatest apologists of the system, for all its good and bad, right, is that it's a reflection of human nature, right? And I think that's kind of also what she's getting at in the poem, right? This association of nature with kind of multinational corporate. That's what came to mind. Maybe someone has other interpretations of it, but that's kind of what came to mind here, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
If I can add,
please.
It reminds me of something I've read when I was in Manchester, quite similar to what we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
It was a poem by Jan Hamilton Finlay called Estuary.
Okay.
And it was published in 1989.
Okay.
And it's basically, like, my notes are like all over the place, but it's basically just these lists of a few words.
Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Like oil companies at the bottom.
Yeah.
And at the top we have like types of birds and like elements of nature. And it's when we were talking about it, what came up a lot was how we, like on the right side, for example, here, we know all those words, what they mean, what they stand for, what they represent, or what the companies are.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the left, for some of them, we do have to Google them to see what they look like.
Yeah.
And it shows a little bit how like alienated we are from nature and the knowledge around here, and how we don't have or really use the terms anymore to qualify nature, because nature to us, or like what's around us, as like nature used to be for human beings, it's now like corporations and cities. And
that makes me think of an article that I read not that long ago. I'd have to find exactly like which. There's a bunch of articles, but there's a recent study that was published in the journal Earth earlier this year, right? That found that the use of nature-related words is actually in decline among, especially like city-dwelling people like ourselves, right? Exactly for the reason that you're bringing up. But there's a like quantifiable drop in these terms, right? How many of you have seen a blackbird in your life, for example, right? Or even a deer? Right. These are things that used to be very, very common to see, right? Even in the suburbs where you would have lived. But the drop in them,
there's
right?
still some. Right?
There's still some.
We see some.
Some they do exist, but it's entirely plausible in my mind that someone would pass their life without actually seeing one.
Oh, really?
Absolutely, right? I can point to more than one person in my entourage who has never seen either of those things.
I literally saw one on one of the really well-fast routes, and I think he was going to States for this.
Probably, yeah.
It was really going towards the whole cars, and I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
I have friends who've had like a culture shock moment when they come to visit me in the South Shore and they just see bunnies. To them, it's not a common sight. They're like, how do you just have bunnies running around?
It's just a thing. Yeah.
It's weird. Yeah. I legit just saw, what's the word? Mufet.
A skunk.
Yeah. In, just outside my apartment a week ago.
Yeah. But it's like, we use the terms of concrete animals, but even what the study showed is between 1800 and 2019, and this is based off of obviously the written word because we don't have recordings of people in 1800 just speaking, right? But things like even arbitrary and abstract terms like blossoms or beak, meadow, right? All of these have kind of slowly declined, right, in terms of usage. So I think you're really hitting the nail on the head here, Lianyi, with what terms we should be using, perhaps, right, to talk about the world, and what terms we actually use. Yeah. Right. Good.
What the conclusion we had come to for that other poem I'm talking about was I wrote a poem of how we became alienated from nature because of fossil fuel culture, but also maybe that there are natural ways of using language and unnatural ways of using it, and that it can suggest that humans should use language to reconnect. Nature.
Yeah. That opens up a whole can of worms that we don't need to get into necessarily right now, but that opens up a whole can of worms of how natural is language.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, we've always had language on some form, right? Even when, some Neanderthal was pointing to an elephant and saying "gnusht," right? So there is some kind of verbal nature, right? But thinking of writing in this way, I don't know how natural this is, right? Or maybe it's the most natural thing.
Well,
because it looks like a weird root system. Or something.
In a way, it kind of is, because we come back to the rocks, the pictures on it, and everything. That was their way of communicating and writing. In Egypt, those were signs and were birds and everything. So that was the way of writing. But we always wrote down stuff. It was just not on this type of paper.
Yeah.
It was more like rocks or steel or concrete or anything.
All kinds of things.
But it was our way.
Yeah.
Instead of roots, we have this.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, we'll take another break because someone wants to, and we'll come back to kind of discuss some final thoughts on Wong's poems. Okay. I'm just going to look at my notes here, see if I'm forgetting anything that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, okay, so I guess one of the things that came to mind when I was rereading these poems are two forms of satire, which may seem like an odd thing to say, right? But I promise it makes sense. Have any of you seen the movie recently, Don't Look Up? Yeah.
With Leonardo DiCaprio?
Oh, he might be, actually. Yes, he's the main character. Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio, what's his face, who was in Dune? Timothy Chalamet is in it.
There's that girl.
I was going to say Jennifer Lopez, but no. Completely different Jennifer. Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah, so I was thinking of that. And what also came to mind is Jonathan Swift, A Modest Proposal. Right? So why indeed? Have any of you ever read A Modest Proposal? What's it about?
It's like this text about eating babies.
Yeah.
It's about what? Sorry.
You heard correct.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But it's like super ironic.
Yeah. So it's a satire.
Yeah.
So Swift was a incredible satirist, Irish satirist, and what he was doing is making fun of British policies concerning food in Ireland, right? And what he was saying was like, well, obviously the solution is quite simple. We'll just ask the Irish to eat their children, right? Because it's as ridiculous as anything else that the British are offering that we do. Right, that was kind of his point. Right, is that it's just as ridiculous as anything that is legally sanctioned by the British Empire. So might as well just eat our own. Right, I'm basically summing up a much funnier text than I'm making it out to be. It's quite hilarious, as hilarious as baby eating can be, I guess. But the reason why I was thinking of it is obviously because of the relation to consumption and food, right, that we're kind of like bringing up here, right? And it's a similar reason why I'm thinking of Don't Look Up, right? Because usually in satire, what you see is a willingness on a formal level to punch up, right? That's what satire is for. And when I say punch up, I mean, some perceived or actual oppressed or minority population, right? Punching up towards those in power as a way of actually speaking truth to that power, right? That's usually what satire is meant for. And what I find interesting about Forage is that it does have a lot of the elements of satire, right? Insofar as she is taking aim at a very specific type of system and power, right, that she considers to be oppressive in many ways, right, both for people and the planet. But where I think she takes it a little bit further than pieces of art, if you can call it that, I think genuinely is a horrible movie that should be like annihilated from the face of the planet. But where it takes it further than things like Don't Look Up is that she actually offers alternatives, right? Or that in her poetic practice and in thinking through the idea of Forage, she's offering a way out, right? And this is my way of kind of like bringing it back to what we were talking about with Anna Tsing at the beginning, right? Of imagining otherwise. Right? One of my main criticisms of a movie like Don't Look Up is that while it is funny in moments and it does hit on like a very real issue of the world is going to like get hit by a metaphorical meteorite, it ends on the idea of, well, we're all morons who are just going to like look up at the sky as we're destroying ourselves, right? And it doesn't actually offer any kind of tangible way out, right? Or wanting to offer a way out, right? And I think Wong takes that and kind of goes against it, right? In offering a way out, even if just by actually looking the problem in its face and taking it seriously, right? But also, like we were saying, in engaging with the idea of foraging as a radical practice. Yeah, I don't know. Does this make sense as a pathway forward? Yeah, or as a stream of thought? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wanting to see what were the two types of satire, because I think that was one, unless I missed the second one.
Did I say that there were two types of satire?
Well, I think you meant two works, like the movie and the.
Oh yeah, like the movie and
okay, so it was like two different things, but satire was the element.
Yeah,
those
exactly.
two. Okay.
So I mean, Swift. I guess Swift, for all his hilarity, also falls in a similar trap where what he's offering as a solution is not actually a solution, right? He's not actually proposing that people eat their children, right? But he is at least engaging with the concept of the imaginary solution more than Don't Look Up is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I will give him that credit a little bit more than I will Ian McKay, or whatever the name of the director was, of that terrible, terrible movie.
So you do not recommend the movie?
No. I recommend it if you want to, like, have a bad time for 2 hours.
Sometimes you do.
So, yeah, sometimes you just want you just want to, like, cry. Yeah. The poem that really comes to mind for this is I'm looking at page 16. Actually, page 16, 17. Does it go on to 18? 18 and 19. The Girl Who Ate Rice Almost Every Day.
Mm.
Right? It's a good one. So we're not going to read all of it, of course, because it's quite long. But I do think it does a really interesting job of thinking how sometimes it can be difficult to get out of whatever system we're stuck in, right? Or that we're given, right? Because none of us necessarily asked to be born into the world that we are, like, trying to escape from. But we do try anyway, right? And I think it does a good job of this. So I was just going to read the first stanza, if you want to call it that. I don't know if it's, like, formally a stanza, but yeah, we'll go with first stanza. The Girl Who Ate Rice Almost Every Day. Rice World was sold out of brown rice, so she went to the Sundown Mall on the street of no return, strolled past low-maintenance, high-risk properties in search of plump grains, distracted by gloss and air-conditioned spectacle. She said to the manager in the supermarket, "What big beets you have." "All the better to tempt you, my dear." "To tempt you with, my dear," he replied. That most ungenerous of storekeepers frowned, for she had fingered his goods without purchasing them. "Try one," he urged. "It's a free sample." The red sliver stained her lips, a cosmetic wound. So we start off with this section, if you will. What jumps out to us immediately when we read something like this? What comes to mind?
Yeah. When you think about beats, this is not so attractive.
No.
That's the thing. And
not a fan of beats.
There it said, "All the better to tempt you." So this is not something like a temptation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because but you're right. Like, you don't really, when you're thinking of temptation, the first thing that comes to mind is not a beet.
Of course not.
Especially not a raw beet, like this is presumably.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. You would think, I don't know, of something that you could eat a little bit more raw, like a piece of fruit or something like that, or cheese, or I don't know, like even a tomato. Right? Like even a tomato would keep it red, but it doesn't have the capacity to necessarily stain in the same way that a beet does, so it kind of fits in with that. So what is the tempting part then? If it's not the fruit itself, or not the beet itself, what is so tempting about it? Because I think you're getting onto something here. What is the temptation aspect of this beet, if not just its existence as a raw piece of vegetable?
That they're pretty big. Bigger than what it's supposed to be.
Good. Yeah. Which is, by the way, like something that we see all the time, right? If you go to the Gatineau market to like an organic food stand, the beets that are there are like this big, maybe. They're pretty tiny in nature, right? If you just let it be. But if you go to, I don't know, Maxi, right, or Metro next door, the beets are like massive, right?
Yeah,
the size that no beet actually should, yeah? Mm-hmm. But that's the selling point, right? It's like, oh, you get more for your buck, right? Now, what's interesting, I think, about this poem is that on the flip side of it, right, you kind of get the reason why it's so plump and tempting. Mm-hmm. Right? What is that reason?
OGM.
GMO.
Yeah.
You had the right letters. Right letters, wrong order.
It's chemicals for growth.
Yeah. So, Aritza sativa inter alia, go to the U.S. patent database, blah, 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 and do the following search term. Monsanto, assignee name, a search of records from 1976 to January 2007, which is when she would have stopped writing this. It was published in 2008, yields 3,894 records. If you add a second term, soybean, in the search field, title, you will find 210 patents. And so on, so on, so on. Right? If you change the second search term to rice in the search field and keep Monsanto in the assignee name, you'll find 4 patents. Corn yields 21, tomato yields 2, potato yields 2, wheat yields 5, cauliflower yields 1. So there's as she says at the bottom, there is a high probability that the numbers will be greater by the time you access the database yourself. Right? I actually never went on the database to see if that was actually true, but I'm sure it is.
Oh,
right. It would be a good exercise to actually do USPTO.gov. But the idea that that we're going for here is that PATFT. Trying to do 2 things at once is not great. Right, is that there's nothing particularly natural about this. Right, you're absolutely right. It is just GMOs. Right, it's not bigger because the producer or the farmer is better. It's bigger because it's like the gaps are filled in with chemicals, right, from Monsanto. Does anyone know about Monsanto, as a company, right? Just what it was up to? If you want to get another depressing Tuesday night or whatever, I would recommend that you look into it. But it's probably best known for being the company that produced Agent Orange in Vietnam, right? So that lovely little piece of chemical warfare. Same company, basically, that makes the stuff that you eat, also made the stuff that produced generations of ill-formed children in Vietnam, right? And again, this is not me wanting to depress you for a 6th week in a row. What I wanted to do with this poem specifically is really emphasize where this character of the girl who ate rice almost every day starts off as, right? And use it as a demonstration of what Wong is offering as a radical practice, right? Or a forage practice, so to speak. So for those of you who did read the poem, what is the rest of the story about, right? Where does it go? As far as kind of a character arc, I guess, is concerned. So she starts off in the supermarket, and then what happens?
She tries to grow rice in the sewers and ask the rats for help.
Yeah. Okay. So ask the rats for help. Where's this?
I only have a tiny point. I just realized that what big beats you have, all better to tempt you with, my dear. It sounds like Little Riding Hood.
Yeah.
And the wolf as a predator, just being come here, I'll make you food or whatever. And then it literally kills you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Funny little.
I thought that was the first thing we were going to discuss, and then I was like, if it's not being discussed, is it just not there and I'm seeing it?
No, it's there.
I really sorry. I was like, oh, that's
I decided not to go in that direction, but we can. Absolutely right. It is tempting, right?
But then the rest of the story with the rats and everything, it feels princessy, talking to animals, asking for their help.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's kind of a...
So there is a bit of a fairy tale element to it.
Fairy tale thing going on.
But again, it gets both at the idea of fairy tale, of the fairy tale that's being sold, right? Of great excess of food, right? That you don't need to worry about, which is a fairy tale in and of itself, right? But also the fairy tale in the sense of imagination, right? Imagining otherwise, right? And that's kind of what happens throughout the rest of this I'll just keep calling it a poem because I don't know what else to call it. Even though it doesn't like formally look like a poem, right? But as the story continues, right, as the poem develops, she's basically creating her own like microcosm of her microcosmic space, if you will, of self-sustainability, right? Where she comes back to the beets and has her own fertilizer and so on and so forth, and creates her own rice. And it becomes this kind of radical, emancipatory little fairy tale, right? But in a different sense, right? It's a different kind of fairy tale since, realistically speaking, most of us couldn't actually do this, right? I don't know about you, but in my little 4.5 apartment, right? Yes, it is next to a lot of organic produce stands, but I wouldn't be able to like necessarily have my little self-sustaining garden in it, right? So it's a fairy tale in and of itself, but it's a reassuring fairy tale that is perhaps more productive to think about than the other fairy tale that we start off with, right? Which is a predatory type of wolf fairy tale. Yeah. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting poem to discuss in that sense. Is there anything else that came to mind with that poem?
The last little bit there of like, it reminds me a little bit of like what we read with the mushrooms that live through like ruin.
Yeah.
Like, long after the last eaters disappeared from this spinning planet, the slow cooking rice continued to make its way through the sewers and alleys of many a struggling city.
Yeah. So rice, in a way, is one of those things that acts in the same way as the mushrooms. Yeah. And it kind of is. There's a really great documentary that was produced by the CBC, I want to say like 5 years ago or something like that. I think it came out in like 2019, 2020. You can look it up. It's called, I think it's Cottagers versus Indians, something like that, where it's all about this guy who uses rice and rice planting as a radical way of fighting off white cottagers, right? So he just goes around on these lakes and sows rice everywhere, right? And rice, for those of you who don't know, is something that grows very quickly and everywhere, right? So something like his little act would have made just fields of rice in these quaint little cottage lakes. Yeah. And his whole purpose is to stop people from boating all over the place, right? And creating noise pollution and actual pollution on the lake, and instead having this like lovely little rice paradise, right? And it's somewhere in Ontario that he does this, in like Northern Ontario, but I'd have to look up the actual thing. And the people who are living there in their cottages are very mad at him for actually doing this, because they're like, well, you're stopping us from enjoying the boats, right? And polluting this lake by producing rice, right? Which is this great tentacular little root system. So yeah, that's what came to mind with that. But yeah, absolutely, I think mushrooms and the mushrooms at the end of the world, and this slow cooking rice at the end of the world can be very much connected productively. Right?
Also, like, Sing like mentions the like imagining differently or in new ways. It's like this character here did do that.
Yeah.
It ended up with something that lasted like past humans, but that did survive and did contribute to. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, and it goes past her own existence, right? It goes past her own life, right? Brilliant. Let's see if I have it open here. Let's see if Monsanto actually pulls up anything on the U.S. Patent Office. While I look for this, is there any other poems? We have time for one last poem, if anyone wants to bring some up. So when I type in Monsanto, by the way, into the U.S. Patent Office, 58,337 records show up. Compared to 20 years ago, 3,894. So literally 10 times more. In this case, right, soybean varieties, plant regulatory elements, fungicidal compositions, protein fragments of avian eggs.
It's kind of freaking me out.
Yeah. Hybrid corns.
Yeah.
That's great. To be fair, this is in the U.S.
Of course.
We have different ones here, but probably very similar. Like, to be honest, having family on farms, it's not that different. Any other poems that pop out to us as a last one?
I don't really do, but I like the Domestic Operations 2.01.
Which page is this?
It's 43. The one that were basically some picking at the government type. Just like the word she uses is very, very good.
Yeah.
Like testosterone in suits. Do the suits have maternal instincts? Sure could use an estrogen bomb aimed at the Pentagon right about now. I was like, oh, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. It's poems like this that made me think of the satirical element of it, right?
Yeah, when you said satire, I was like, oh, this is the one. This is the one that makes me think of that.
Yeah. I don't think all of it falls under that category, but these ones definitely do, right? The eagle will plummet if one religious wing refuses to hear the other religious wing. That's oddly prescient for today. Intimidated by the testosterone in suits, but refusing to back down. Yeah. The state of the world precariously perched on some Republican fingertip. Middle finger. Maybe a liturgical reminder, maybe humor, maybe denial, maybe a miracle cradled in skeletal hands. Suddenly a bureau tilted, falling, collapse, so on and so forth. This is also a good poem for another reason entirely. The surrounding words, right? It's kind of framed as the previous one is also framed by other words. Why? Why does she do this?
You mean, why does she frame?
Yeah, why would she? Why not just include it normally in another poem or in the poem itself? Nuns hammered on the concrete silo lid, cut cables, spread their blood in the sign of the cross on the silo tracks, and completed a liturgy before they were surrounded by armed military personnel. They were arrested and imprisoned in the Clear Creek Country Jail in Georgetown, Colorado.
I think it's a good example of what they did.
Yes.
Basically, it continues. Well, it begins on the other page. So, two women who tried to stop a bombing, and they were put in prison and made like an example of, don't do this. This is not what we're standing for. Don't stand in the way, basically, because otherwise you'll end up like this.
Yeah.
But what they were doing was actually a good thing, because they were trying to stop something terrible from happening.
Yeah. So good, right? On like the activist level, right? Absolutely, right? There's the idea of like you're trying to physically stop something from happening. Which, by the way, Rita Wong is also an activist, right? I don't know if you looked her up. She was actually in jail for like a month because of similar activism to this, right? So a bit of a punk in her own right. She was someone who performed who was an activist for Indigenous rights, right? Who is an activist for Indigenous rights, right? And that's what led to her imprisonment. I think on the one hand, there is this interesting contrast that happens on a thematic level, right? What's actually happening and what people are, or how people are resisting, right? So good. What else is happening? Maybe think on the formalistic level. Why would she put that on the frame, right? Or in the surrounding capacity? And this is true of most of the poems that she does this kind of framing with. If you want to look at Parenthetical Breath, or Vessels, or Green Trust, right? All of these other poems that she does this with, you see a similar, I would argue, a similar reason or similar effect. So why formalistically have this on the margin, perhaps, if you want to use that?
Well, here it is like the act of individuals who are on the margin, and, like, don't conform to this everything that's just normalized. Most of us accept and go by silently.
Good. Yes. Right. In the domestic operations one, it's normalized versus actualized religion. Right. In this case, right. So she's talking in domestic operations 2.0 about one religious wing refusing to hear the other religious wing. So we've talked about this before of how, evangelical Christianity in the United States is going haywire and that it's depressing in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not by accident that what she puts on the margins, right, as a kind of framing device, if you will, are nuns. Right, in this case, a different type of religious practice, right, or praxis. So yeah, absolutely. But if you look at other poems where she does this, sometimes she refers to indigenous activists, right? I'm thinking of I'm thinking of one where she refers to not Rachel Carson. There's one where she references Richard Van Camp. I think that's one. Yeah, 77. A poem called Resuscitate. And in the margins, Richard Van Camp is an indigenous writer who's fantastic if you want to look more into that. He doesn't quite fit into the planetary literature that we're talking about, but he's really good and I recommend him. Right? I would rather unleash fire than have fire unleash me. Right? So again, kind of putting these marginalized voices into a way that, yes, demonstrates physically, right, their apartness, but is distinctive enough in the way that it's written or the way that it's demonstrated that you can't help but pay attention to it. Which I think is a fun little formalistic usage of poetry here. Good stuff. Marcio and Ea, I don't know, did you have anything you wanted to add? Not to put you all on the spot, but you were a little bit more quiet in the second half of class. I just wanted to make sure that everything is good.
I got to admit, I didn't read.
Yeah.
And that's why I have no words
That's cool.
Comply with you guys.
I guess to finish off here, as one last question, how is the poetry itself an act of foraging? I guess that would be one way of kind of capping all of this off. In what way does her poetry forage? Obviously, I'm talking about like more abstracted metaphorically here. I don't think they're like poems actually walk around and like pick up mushrooms, but like, how does her poetry forage?
Like the contents or its form? Or
both. I think you can make an argument for both.
I think like her form, just like the Forage, is very like non-linear.
Mm-hmm.
It resembles, like it imitates a bit of like what we revised over like the multitasking mushrooms.
Yes. Good.
It forces you to follow an uneven path.
Very good. Right. Sometimes literally uneven. Right. To take another margin one. Right. It doesn't actually follow the straight line. Right. So sometimes literally uneven. Yeah. So good. Right. And even for poems like this, right, this is just a pure coincidence. Right. Language and Habits on page 34. Where do you even begin? Right. Do you start with the margins and then read the center? Do you read the center, then the margins? Do you try to figure out what the Chinese symbols mean and then kind of go back? Right. Sometimes, right, the nonlinearity is implied and adds to the texture of the poem in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a quote in there that says to like not look in front of us but look around us, and it's interesting with like the margins and the written words around it.
Mm-hmm. So are you
like, link between this and the other one just to complete the poem?
So we're turning poetry into from high context to low context, perhaps, or low context to high context, rather, I should say. Good. What else? So, yes, on the level of form, I think you're absolutely correct, Aya. On the level of content, how does she forage? I think it's a bit more obvious on the level of content.
Well, she's literally taking information from everywhere, from anyone, and just stacking it all up.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, I'm going to take this, and use this to make this.
Yeah. What I think is interesting to consider is not just the act of taking from everywhere, right? Because we do that all the time. Yeah. As just the way that we communicate ideas. Our ideas don't come from nowhere, right? They come from various places. What I think is interesting is how much she foregrounds that pulling from everywhere, right? She explicitly takes from pictures, right? She tells you where she found her sources, right? She emphasizes how much information is from somewhere else, or that it's something aside, right? To the point where she even has a reference section at the end, right? Which you rarely see in poetry. How many poetry books have you read that has a reference section at the end of it? Oops, my pages are starting to fall apart here. Right, I can speak to that. I don't think I've ever seen... no, I've seen some poetry that does that, but it doesn't happen very often, right? That poetry has some references at the end. And so it becomes an active practice of picking and choosing, right? What language you foreground, how you foreground that language, and for what purpose you foreground that language. Right? And in this case, taking what is highly institutionalized language, like the Patent Office, right, or like critics like Northrop Frye, who's literally a structuralist, what we call a structuralist, and reframing it into a new assemblage, right, to come full circle to that term, in a way that is a happy accident for the context of this class. All right. Thank you for all of your wonderful insights on this. That was awesome. No class next week because of reading week or whatever, right? So we're spending 2 weeks on the tiger flu, okay, just because it's a longer book, so I don't expect you to like necessarily have time to finish all of it. I've already started my notes for those 2 classes. Like I mentioned, the way I'm broadly thinking about it is to start with talking about illness in relation to the planet, which is explicit in the novel and in its title. And then the second half of class, or the second week of class, I should say, thinking more about concepts of kinship. Right, that's why I'm having you read Donna Haraway. Right, that's her main idea. So that's broadly how I was thinking of organizing it, just because I need like some kind of organizing principle, I guess. As much as I would like to, I think it's rather difficult to enact an assemblage-based classroom. So that's how I'm broadly thinking of it. But if the conversation goes in kind of a different direction, obviously we can kind of deal with it as we go along. That's totally fine. And of course, Marcio is going to be presenting next week.
I'm going to take care of you guys.
Okay, good. I feel reassured. I will say this. The Tiger Flu is a bizarrely written novel. I think it's very contemporary, right? It was published like 10 years ago, something like this, right? So very contemporary in its language, but it's very much one of those books that just throws you in the middle of the action, right? And doesn't really answer the questions immediately, right? Some novels kind of take you by the hand and like, okay, this is the world we're inhabiting. This is what this means. This is what that means. don't expect this with the tiger flute. Okay, there's going to be terms that are thrown around, and you have to guess what they mean based on the context that is provided everywhere else. And I think you are all intelligent enough to do that, right? It's not that difficult, but just go into it knowing that, right? That you'll just kind of have to accept some things. All right. Wonderful. On that note, I will see you in 2 weeks. Enjoy your reading week. And yeah, that's it.